All right, we're rolling to the end here. This is good. It's got an exciting time here. All fun stuff now here on out. The topic today, of course, is Pieper, so it's a Pieper day. So we're doing the last part of his volume 3, starting at 507 and cranking through to the end. And that's what we've got today, dealing with that. And the next time I got 3 readings for you, I am suspicious maybe not everybody got their reading done for today because you're busy writing a paper. Whatever. But do the readings for sure for next time. I mean, take a look at them. Long is interesting, but there's a lot of substantive content in that. So I want you to take a look at that one. And the stuff by Kreeft is also very much worthwhile. And the CTCR is answering something a little more thoroughly than Pieper does. So make sure you get those things done. They're quite significant. All right, good. Any quick observations or reactions to Pieper as we get started and rolling here? Josh.
Really quick, there's a group of people that Pieper kept refuting.
Oh, the Chilias?
The Chilias. Are they basically the pre-dispensational millennialists?
Yes. So and we'll talk about them a little bit more, but millennialism, okay, and Chiliasm are the exact same people, okay? This is the Latin root, and this one is the Greek root, and they both mean 1,000-year stuff. Okay. That's all it is. So Chilias just sounds really cool because, you know, millennialist, okay, that's pretty cool. But if you really want to show, hey, I'm a theologian, let's talk about Chiliasm. Okay, you know, and so it's got a little bit more of a whoa, in your face kind of a sound to it. So when people are talking about Chiliast, it's a little more potent than just talking about millennialist. But that's what's going on. And so he uses the term all the time, and they both, because in Latin, millennia means 1,000, and in Greek, Chilia means 1,000. So the exact same thing. Adam.
What was the issue with the social democrats?
The social democrats?
Yeah, he rails against them for like one sentence.
Oh, it's probably something in his day, and he's all concerned about it. I'm not that. Yeah. Yes, Brian.
So, page 538 says, food, digesting,
all we'll get there.
Yeah,
we'll get there. Okay. All right. Now we're into details. Let's go. So page 507, let's just crank through this thing and get going on this and let people walk us through this thing. So we're talking, first of all, he's broken this down. This is his whole section on eschatology. And eschatology simply means what? Study of the end times. All right? And this comes from the Greek word eschaton, which means end. Oh, thank you. All right, good. Now, eschaton is a little different than telos, because an eschaton is like boom, end, end of the book. Telos is the goal that you're aiming at, the thing you're shooting for. So it's a little different. But eschatology then is the study of the end. So when we think about the end, we often think about Christ's second coming and all that stuff. But the more immediate end that most of us are going to be facing is and so that's where he's going to talk about death, and he's going to talk about the second return of Christ, and then all the attendant things. There's lots of stuff that goes on in here, and obviously this is a topic that you can span a lot, but we'll get into this thing. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is death, and death gets divided into a couple of different kinds. We can talk about, in fact, several different levels of death. We can talk about spiritual death, and we can talk about temporal death, and we can talk about eternal death. And all of these are scripturally used and are discussed. So spiritual death means what? This is the state of someone apart from relationship with God, spiritually dead. And this is the natural state of all people in a sinful condition. So in the world in which we're living today, every single child is conceived and born spiritually dead. All right, which gets back to our baptism discussion. So this is, in a sense, an equivalent of original sin. So spiritual death is being not in a relationship with God, not related to the Creator. So that would be spiritual death. Temporal death, then, of course, is the death of the physical body. Okay, death of the physical body. So the physical body no longer lives and is dead. And eternal death is simply what? Yeah, separation from God, hell. Okay? So eternal death is hell. Now, what we're getting into this discussion then is primarily, number 2, is temporal death and thinking about that. Spiritual death is the natural state of people without God. Eternal death is hell. We'll talk about that. And this is sometimes, the Bible will talk about the second death, probably is aiming towards this. Then there's the temporal death. And so you have to have a fair amount of kind of paying attention as you're reading the Bible to ask, which of the three deaths are we talking about? Okay? And kind of sorting this thing out a little bit. I saw a hand come and go. Brian? No? Okay. So when we're talking about temporal death, that's what we're discussing here with Pieper. And Pieper does the kind of typical move, and he's functioning with the dualist understanding of the human body, or the human creature. So in a dualist understanding, we would say that a human being anthropologically is made of spirit and body. And so we have the twofold aspects. So we have a material aspect and the immaterial aspect, and that's what makes a human a human. Now, that's fair, and there's scripture to support this, but we have to be a little bit careful because overemphasizing dualistic stuff tends to make us a little bit too Aristotelian, a little too Greek, a little too Platonic, and we start kind of having this kind of bifurcation of, you know, the spiritual me and the bodily me. Now, the reality is, scripturally, we are simply a unity. And this is illustrated very well in Genesis 2, where you have God forming Adam from the mud, builds him up, and then he breathes into him the ruach, the spirit, the breath, the wind, and then Adam becomes a living being. Now, that seems to say, okay, we got the body part that's just there, then the spirit makes him really alive. Now, the downside of that, though, is we start doing this kind of duality thing. And the reason I'm pressing against that is because you start getting this idea from people that, well, the body is just kind of my vehicle, but the real me is my spirit. You know, that's my personality, that's the real me, and my body's not important. Whereas, in fact, what we have scripturally is the body-spirit duality isn't a duality, it's a cohesive, just kind of oneness. A human being is body and is soul together at once. Bonhoeffer stresses this nicely in his Creation and Fall, where he says, a human does not have a body, he is a body. And I think that's very nicely said. It's not like you have this possession of a body. You are a body. It's who you are. This is not how our world in the West functions. Our West functions strongly with the Greek duality thing going. And so you have this sense of the body is just my vehicle, the real me is inside. So now you can have Bruce Jenner deciding the real him is a woman, and he needs to get a body to match because his real self inside isn't matching with his physical self. And that's just Greek kind of talk. That's the way, you know, that kind of duality thing. Or you get this, I remember an episode in Star Trek Next Generation. I think I've seen 2 in my entire life when I was somewhere traveling sometime. And it was the whole point, though, was someone had fallen in love with this person, but then that person's body was dying, so that person got put into a new body, and the new body happened to be a different sex, and now can you still love me? I'm still the same person, just my body's different. What do you know? And it was like, oh, brother, you know, where did they get that idea for that story? But see, the premise behind it, though, was the real me is the insides. My body just happens to be the vehicle I'm in, this go around. You know, it doesn't, the real me is the inside stuff. That's nonsense. That's not scriptural. The real you is you sitting in the chair. Your body, your fingers, your arms, you. That's who you are. The real you is not just inhabiting the body. And so we've got to, and this helps us to overcome this sort of often, this body self disconnect, and you hear about this, you know, I feel disconnected from my body, you know, I'm alienated from my own body. That's Greek silly talk. You don't hear this from Christians. Christians simply are what we are. Now, having said all that, death comes along and pulls the spirit and the body apart. So you see, it's not like we've got this little slot, you know, where the thumb drive slops in, and there you put the personality. There, kicks it in, woo, everything's running, we're booted up perfect. And then when you die, pull the thumb drive, oh, everything crashes. It's far more complicated than this. And so when the body and the soul are torn apart, everything is ripped apart. Every neuron, every connection, everything, it's just all getting ripped apart. It's not cool. It's not simple. It's not neat and clean. It's a mess. It's a bad thing. So death is tearing apart what God intended to be intimately pulled together, which it is in our human psyche. And what's interesting is even psychologists and biologists are having a harder and harder time separating the physical from the emotional and the mind from the brain and this kind of stuff. These things get all bound up together. So death tears apart what was never meant to be torn apart. So death ain't cool, okay? Bottom line, it's not cool. Now, the other thing we have to be a little bit careful about is, while we make some distinctions between spiritual and temporal death, the Bible also tends to run these things together. And so, to be spiritually dead is always going to lead to physical death. And physical death is the manifestation of the spiritual death, and it's just they always go together. They belong together. And so we have to be careful not to over-push these distinctions between them, because they all start running on the same kinds of rails. All right, good. So what is death? It is the separation of body and soul. Real straightforward. What is the reason for it? Sin. That's about as simple as you can put it. So sin is the reason people die, because death is the wages of sin. This is significant because, in my opinion, this is probably the single biggest problem and sticking point with attempts to try to reconcile scriptural or confessional confession with science when it comes to origins. And you have people who are wanting to do the theistic evolution thing and say, well, God used evolution to make it all happen. There, everybody's happy. So we got Genesis 1 and 2 are happy, and the scientists are happy because God used evolution. Well, that would be awesome if you could pull it off. And the day thing is not that big a sticking point. No, what does Yom really mean? And people argue about that. But the bigger sticking point, in my opinion, far more significant than what does a day mean or the words, is this whole problem. Is death the wages of sin or not? And if death is the wages of sin, then how do you have God using death for how many millennia and millions of years to accomplish a good purpose? It's redefining death. And then death is no longer really the wages of sin. Now death is actually a great tool that God uses to accomplish His purpose, which is the evolution of His species. So is death bad or good? And if you're a strict evolutionist, death is a great thing. Got to have it. Natural selection depends on death. Lots of death. Lots and lots and lots of death. You got to have it. And so death is a key component. So you end up redefining stuff. Now you can start making the move of saying, well, okay, the Bible is really in Genesis, the wages of sin is spiritual death, separation from God, and that's different than physical death. Yeah, okay, you can maybe start running that route, but then you run into another problem, which is the whole Christological Christ event. And so if Jesus just needed to die spiritually from His Father, why the big rigmarole of the cross? And what's with the big physical death thing? And it seems like the physical death is kind of significant in the scriptural record, and that Jesus actually died a physical death and came back physically alive with His body. It seems to matter a little bit in the Bible. And so to try to start playing the game of, well, it's physical versus spiritual, you run into trouble with the incarnation itself, I think. And so I'm not ready to be dogmatic about this, but I'm saying you need to be a little bit careful about opening the doors wide and saying everything's solved here, because death is a problem. And if we're going to start redefining death as, well, it's kind of just natural, you're going against the entire scriptural record, frankly. And this is an important point, because in the New Testament, death is never seen as a positive good thing. In the Old Testament, every once in a while you get little hints of it. You know, okay, I've died and I don't feel anything anymore. It's oblivion, the kind of the Sheol thing. But in the New T, you're not getting this. In the New T, you get the sense of, you know, you're being pulled apart. Now, Paul can talk about being with my Lord, and that's better by far. But what he's anticipating is the final state. And that's where we're going here next with this whole discussion. All right. So cause of death, Pieper's right on 508. Ultimately, it's God. You die because God wills it. Secondarily, we can blame it on Satan, because Satan is one who messes things up. But ultimately, the reason people die is because God brings this about. All right, so why do Christians die then? So if Christians are freed from condemnation, why are they still dying? Well, because we still have a sinful body, and we still sin, and so the wages of sin is death, and so we still die physically. This is the answer we would have for that. Coleman.
Okay, I realized Jesus is sinless.
Yes.
But He dies.
Correct.
So
that's good.
yes.
So far, so good. No.
Catechism hasn't failed.
No, actually yet.
How do we explain that part of it? I mean, I realize that we look at it and go, the sin is put on it, but I mean, it's still, that's just kind of weird.
Well, yeah, I don't, and that's why you get people who are rejecting the vicarious atonement as cosmic child abuse, and they get all weirded out about it. To me, the best way around that is just to go to 2 Corinthians 5:21, where God made Him who knew no sin to be sin. So not only is it a sin bearer, but He actually owns it. He becomes the sinful one. And so, and that, this is, you're to the core, the very marvel of the gospel. The sinless one becomes sin. Who can account for that? How do you explain it? Well, you eventually don't. You just confess it and receive it. So, just marvel in the gospel there today, Coleman. It's all good. Just don't, well, you going to live in it. There's nothing wrong with living in the gospel, guys. I live in the gospel every day. That's why you can smile, for crying out loud. If you're living only in the law, you can only be miserable. So you live in the gospel. But you live with the law too. It's okay. Brian.
I've heard, I know it's kind of crazy here. You can just kind of say, shut up, Brian.
I might. Go ahead.
Well, don't worry, it won't be the first time.
I'm not surprised to hear that.
I'm not surprised you said that. I've heard people say because Jesus was sinless and never sin, etc., etc., he would have lived forever as a human on earth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, I mean, yeah, I mean, because if you're not sinful, you don't die. It's the whole point. There are weird little things that float around sometimes, even back with the creation stuff I read from Calvinist writers, who are talking about how Adam was on a trial basis, and that wasn't really the final result, and there's more coming. And it's like, wow, I'm not sure where you're getting all this done, kind of stuff. I think it's kind of old scholastic things that were floating around, but to me, it's pretty straightforward. God created a perfect world, and it was right. And then Adam messes the whole thing up. So what would have happened if Adam hadn't sinned? Well, who knows? It's all moot anyway. But I guess in my read of it, creation would have just kicked right along the way it's supposed to. Now, see, some people, the reason people get trouble with this is because now you have Christ coming, who seems to be taking it to another level. So what's going on with that? So how can you go from perfection to better perfection? You know, and so then they get into a logical bind on these kinds of things. And so what's God up to? And so they assume that somehow Adam was kind of going to progress anyway. I don't think that's necessary. To me, God puts it together, Adam messes it up. He says, all right, fine. So we're sending Christ, which is the plan all along anyway, but we're not going there today, okay? And so now Christ comes, and now we have the creation, whoa, even better. And so I'm of the opinion very strongly that when Adam is resurrected and steps into the new creation, he'll go, whoa, this blows away the first ground. This is even better because Christ has come. And now man and God are together. That's something Adam didn't even have. So it's like, man, it's even cooler. And this is God's MO. You take junk and you make it better. That's how God always operates. Somebody throws a wrinkle, God says, cool, I'll just use that and even better. That's how God operates. So I think that's how to look at it. But to try to read more into that, I think is problematic. All right, good? Yep, Chris.
Back to the spirit-body thing. Without opening a whole can of worms here, how do we understand the nature of being brain dead?
Well, see, these are relevant issues, and this is where you take a Weiss class, and he'll help you sort out all the details. But this is the intricacy stuff, you know. So what does it mean to be dead? What does it mean to be alive? It's not as neat and clean as we think it is. And if you talk to medical people, it gets even stickier, even though they'll try to tell you, well, it's a lack of this or this. Yeah, but, you know, and there are cases where, you know, the fine lines are tight, but for the most case, when the body stops, the brain stops, and everything stops, you know, and you can only keep a person artificially going for so long in circumstances. So, you know, I would say it is the cessation of brain function is probably the best definition of death. Okay. All right, good? So now we're moving on. Page 511. State of souls between death and resurrection. Pieper's good on this part. And he says things quite well, and he's in a little bit of a tight spot because he's got some of his favorite authors from the Lutheran Orthodoxy period who are overreaching on this, and he has to pull back from them a little bit, which he does. But we need to follow this through. So point 2, the state of souls between death and resurrection. What we're talking about now is what we will call the interim state. The interim state. And this is the terminology I think Gibbs likes to use, and it is the appropriate theological language, but the interim state. Now what we're talking about is the time between when a person dies physically, temporally, and so temporal death or physical death, either one will work. And so when a person dies temporally or physically and waiting for the resurrection, this interval of time in between. All right. We're into areas where we're not sure about stuff. And frankly, we run into problems with the whole time-space continuum. You know, what is time? Time is a created, earthbound thing. Got that. But we live bound by time. So time progresses and it's linear. God's eternal. Not only does he not have a beginning and an end, but he doesn't have any present. It's just all omnipresent. It's just now for him, which is inconceivable to us, frankly. And if you try to figure it out, you won't. Anybody who says, yeah, I'm kind of thinking it, no, you're human. You cannot not think in a linear, temporal, time-bound way. It's just the way we are. We have our limits. But God's eternal. Now, some have argued, and because God is eternal, that the eschaton is already here, and the resurrection is already here. In one sense, okay. And so then people will say, so then death doesn't mean you have to wait for anything. When you die, you just step into eternity. And so they liken it to a hallway. And this is the analogy. So you've got this super long hallway with gazillions of doors off of it, and we're walking down the hallway in life. And so all a billion of us are cruising down the hallway of life. And when somebody dies, they open the door, and they step through the door into the other room. But the other room is this vast reality called eternity, and there it's all one big present tense. And while the hallway has a linear progression from 5 BC through to 2017, and you can have different doors and figure out what happened when. Once you step into the other room, boom, it's just all concurrent, continual, present tense now. And we're at the eschaton. So on that theory, when you die, you step into Judgment Day. Okay, whatever. Maybe. But Scripture actually talks other ways as well. And that's why, while that's possible and we can't be too dogmatic about it, we also have to recognize Scripture talks about the sense of kind of waiting and the sense of God limiting himself to the time-bound reality for us and kind of functioning with this. And probably one of the stronger texts is where you have the picture in the Apocalypse of the saints who are under the altar crying out, "How long, Lord? How long?" And these are the saints who are in the presence of God who are waiting. And it's in that sense of they're not quite all together yet, which fits really well with everything we're teaching here about the interim state and of a waiting for something more. So the interim state then is this time period, however long it is, whatever it actually means, between when you die and the resurrection, what's going on in here. And the best thing we can say about this is, we're not sure. We're not sure. Now here are a few things we do know. We do know that it's not the resurrection. And Pieper says quite well in here that a lot of theologians make the mistake of taking resurrection truths and then pulling them back into the interim state. Like, oh, it's a big party, everything's great, everything's happy, we're all having a big party time. Well, that's true of the eschaton, that's true of the apocalypse, the pictures we have at the resurrection. And that's true on the last day. But the interim state, we don't have as much about this. In fact, we have very little information about this. What we would say is that the souls that have died are already either at rest or in torment, based on where they are with Christ. Already at death, it's either one or the other. But it's not the full deal yet. We're still waiting. The full deal is the resurrection at the end. That's the promise that we're waiting for, and we're heading for that moment, that last day. But in the meantime, we go through the interim state, and we're waiting. And so you're either at rest, and at rest would be in God's presence. So you're in Christ, in God's presence, at rest, or you are already in torment, because you are separated from God, and that's true. But this, either rest or torment, is only according to your spirit. Because where's your body? It's back on earth, waiting for the resurrection. And see, that's part of that resurrection problem too. But see, so bodies get buried. Oh, they're still just in the hallway. And then, it gets, but don't overthink it. Just don't, it's not that big a deal. So they are in torment already, even now, but they're still also waiting, and there's more to come. So what's exactly going on here? We don't know. We know that the thief on the cross is told, today you'll be with me in paradise. So some people say, well, paradise has to mean this. And they start putting all kinds of conditions on it. Well, maybe. But paradise can simply mean maybe being in God's presence at rest. All right? Luther suggested that maybe it's like a soul sleep. And Luther was actually sympathetic to this idea of a soul sleep. So that when the person dies, it's like falling asleep. Where do you get that idea? Oh yeah, the Bible. Okay? St. Paul talks about falling asleep in the Lord, okay? So maybe you're just falling asleep and you're at rest, and you have that possibility. Now, a lot of the Orthodox theologians didn't like that, because they said, well, no, because then you're not consciously aware and enjoying God's presence. That can't be, and that's not acceptable. But Pieper admits that Luther was actually kind of fond of this, and so we go to page 512, and we have footnote 21. Footnote 21, second line down. Luther speaks more guardedly of the state of the soul between death and resurrection than do Gerhard and the later theologians, who transfer some things to the state between death and resurrection, which can be said with certainty only of the state after the resurrection. And here's what Luther said. It is divine truth that Abraham, after death, lives with God, serves him, and also rules with him. But what sort of life that is, whether he be asleep or awake, that is another question. How the soul rests, we are not to know. It is certain, however, that it lives. So you see, Luther's a little more open about, we're not sure exactly what's going on here. And let's not overstate our case. Let's be content. And so maybe there's the soul sleep, maybe not. But what we do know is it's not the resurrection yet. What we do know is the souls are just souls, and they don't have their bodies, and they're not really quite themselves just yet. There's more to come. So a couple things to come out of this, I think, which are relevant. The saints under the altar are crying out, how long? They want the full thing to start. They're not content with just eating appetizers. And that's the illustration I'll use sometimes. It's like when you're going to a fancy dinner party and you can smell behind the door all the things being prepared and you know it's coming, it's going to be in a minute. In the meantime, you're eating crackers and cheese, whatever. And it's like, okay, whatever. This is fine. Conversation's nice. I'm getting tired of standing. I want to sit down. I want to eat. But the appetizers keep on going on. And so the interim state is the appetizers. It's the happy hour. Okay? And the resurrection is when you sit down to the meal. That's the real deal. So it's not bad, but there's more to come, and you know that. You're not there yet. That's the sense. C.S. Lewis picks this up very nicely in The Great Divorce, where he paints the picture of hell at the beginning of this as being, this expanse of land, and people are lonely and they go deeper and deeper into the loneliness of hell. But the thing that's really interesting is he portrays it as a kind of a twilight time where the sun has just slipped below the horizon, but it's not fully dark yet. And heaven, by contrast, is early in the morning when the sun is just on the verge of coming, and it's just that moment of anticipation, and any day it's going to be the full day. And that's where we are, kind of like just kind of this holding pattern. It's kind of, it's kind of waiting, tuning up, waiting, and then all of a sudden, boom, the resurrection comes and everything flips completely over. That's the sense of it. So the sense of the interim state is it's anticipation. There's more to come, and the whole point is to be driving us to the resurrection. That's where we're going. Now, this stuff is exceedingly relevant because you're going to deal with this kind of stuff all the time with your people. All the time. And you're going to get the stuff like, well, my baby died, but now she's my little guardian angel watching over me. Or you'll get, I just feel Grandpa's presence. He's still kind of right here with me, and I know that, and it's just giving me a great deal of comfort. Or I can feel them watching me, and it gives me so much joy. And you get all this kind of stuff going. And you hear this a lot. Or you talk about, God just needed him so much, and now they're up there just having this wonderful party, and God and my uncle are having a beer, I just know it, and it's just so great. And that's when you think, well, maybe not. Maybe they're just really happily asleep. And I'll say this too about the soul sleep thing. Those who would suggest that a soul sleep is a letdown don't know what it means to be really tired and have a great night's sleep. Because one of the most delightful things in life is just being able to stretch out and say, and go to sleep. Isn't that great? And I would also say that when you're really sound asleep and sleeping well, it's not like you're unaware. There's a certain, you know what I mean? You kind of know everything's at right and things are at peace. The world is the way it's supposed to be. And there's an awareness that goes with this. Maybe it's not fully conscious, but it's enough. And I don't think that's all bad. I just don't see what's negative about that. The whole point is, whatever happens here, it's all just prelude to this, the real deal. And Pieper's right about that, and we need to teach this a little better because, quite honestly, this has not been taught well in the church for a long time. Most people have the idea that somehow heaven's the party, and as soon as you die, you're there, and that's it. And then you have this disembodied stuff over just these spirits floating around, and that who cares about anything else? And I had one more thought, then I'll get to your questions, your comments. This is also why I think it's kind of significant where the saints under the altar are crying out, how long, O Lord? You see, they want their bodies back. And when you are disembodied, you're not really quite right anymore. Because you're a human. You're created to be in a body. And if you get ripped out of your body, it's not the real you. It's kind of like getting caught naked in the shower. Whoa, I need to get dressed. I'm not quite myself right now. You know, we won't, you know, if someone tries to have a conversation with you when you're in the bathroom, in the dorm, you know, it's like, not right now, dude. You know, let me get dressed. You know, I just not quite myself right now. You see, you need to be dressed. And in a sense, we get dressed into our bodies. And our bodies make us fully what we are. And so spirits are a little bit kind of, I'm feeling a little awkward right now. I'm just a soul right now. I'm missing my body, not quite myself. You're exactly right. You're not yourself. You're meant to be human. You're not angels. You don't turn into an angel. You're a human meant to be a human. And you're meant to have your body. And so at the resurrection, we get our bodies back. Cool. Needed that. And I feel a whole lot better. This is good. And this is the whole point. And we have to be careful that if we overemphasize this, we actually diminish the significance of the body. And then this plays into Amy's concern of the trivializing of the body. And who needs it anyway? And that's a highly Gnostic kind of a thing. And it's not scriptural and it's not Christian. All right, Adam.
The saints are crying out, how long? Can we say that they somehow sense or know that something is still wrong with them?
I think so. That's still kind of the sense. In other words, there's the yearning for more. There's more to come. Well, see, that's the whole point. That's my illustration of the appetizers. If all you have is appetizers the rest of your life, that's not such a good thing. But it's not all bad either. I mean, they're with Christ, they're waiting, and it's okay. But there's the waiting, and wait always means anticipation. You know how waiting is. You know, waiting for Christmas. How fun is Advent? Well, it's got its own joys, but it's only Advent. Christmas better come. Okay, same idea. Yes?
We have a hard time separating consciousness from memory, because consciousness and memory are associated with tense time. And so how much, you know, if they're in their heavenly state waiting, they're recognizing that something's not quite right. They have a memory of how things should be. And then are they aware of those who are not waiting with them?
That's a great question as well. Who knows about this? This is where Pieper starts talking about this a little bit, where the souls, you know, so are we aware of the damned who are not going to be there? And the answer could be twofold. One is no, because that would diminish the joy. And the other one is yes, but it won't matter because our souls will be so aligned with God's now, and our wills will be so on purpose with His. So even though we have memories, our memories are going to even be transformed in the consciousness of a higher reality of being one with Christ. And so our wills will be so nearly aligned with God's will that what God delights in, we delight in. And the extension of His justice will be good to us, even though at this stage in our being, we can't even conceive of that. You know, can't conceive of anybody being in hell being a good thing. And yet, if it's in line with God's purposes, we'll delight in God's purposes. And that's the difference of the resurrected body and of that. Probably even in the interim state, because you know we're translated into God's presence and we see things as He sees them. Go ahead.
But not even God desires the death of the wicked.
Yeah, I know. Now we're into the whole things about antecedent will, consequent will, and now the only way to solve this one perfectly is to move into a origin apokatastasis where everything's redeemed, that's the solution. But that also violates Scripture. So now you're into a bind. Either you got to go with the full universalism, there God gets what He wants, or you have to go with, no, God actually does allow people to choose their self-willful rejection. And see, now you can become a little bit more sympathetic, at least I can, of when C.S. Lewis in his last book, Chronicles of Narnia, has everybody kind of gets a shot at heaven. Some people just don't know it yet. And, you know, and so, because he's got that universalist stuff going on, and you understand why, because it's so compelling if you really get the gospel straight. And I've said this in other classes too. If you really understand the gospel and really get it, you've got to be somewhat sympathetic to universalism. You just got to be. And I know, don't hear me wrong. Oh, you're a universalist? No, I'm not saying that, okay? I'm not saying that. But you've got to at least see the attraction of this, don't you? Don't you want everyone saved? Don't you want everything? Who doesn't? I mean, and that's the grief of not everybody. Oh, how can that be? I don't know. Brian.
When I was in high school and then like up to freshman in college, like I believed that. I thought that God gave people a second chance, the resurrection, you know, like He's God, He's there. The people are there like, oh yeah, I was such an idiot. And like it's because of the gospel, and you realize, well, no, that's not the case, that kind of sucks, but whatever.
Yeah, it's compelling. It is. But you have to follow the whole scriptural record. Chris.
So when we speak of the concept of eternity, we understand it as how we can't conceive it as humans, but without time. Literally, there's no understanding idea of time. So we're stepping into something without us. God is without time, yet working within time. Okay, that's hard to wrap your mind around.
You're quite right. I agree. And I am sympathetic, but I'm not at all, because I don't know how to, we just have to just deal with these kinds of things. Yeah, that's right.
Brother, to talk about who the person who invented time.
Yeah, well, God invented time on day 1, mercifully, or maybe day 2. All right.
Were they really days? Who knows? I don't know.
There were days. There was an evening and morning, day 1, Yom. I know, Yom is a 24-hour period. I believe that. That's the best interpretation. You can be weaselly about it, but the straightforward is 24-hour period. Live with it. And just invoke Veltz there a little bit. Throw the weasel. And if you have him for your Greek, you missed out. Yeah. Part of his pedagogy, he would have a stuffed weasel he would wield. So, all right. Page 515. Yeah, it's kind of infamous. You can probably Google it and find hits on that one. Veltz's weasel. And, yeah, pictures of it around the world and different kinds of things. Seriously, yeah. All right, 515. A couple of things that Pieper just didn't know where else to throw in, but he wanted to get him in here, and these are good points. Last paragraph in the section. Departed souls do not return to this world. Done, okay. So seances, no. Ghosts, no. Okay. However, are there demons? Are they real? Sure. And can demons deceive people? Yes. Do demons know all about people's history and their loved ones and things? Yes. So I think a lot of seances can actually have some very supernatural, metaphysical things going on. It's not that the dead people are there, but demons are just there messing around with people, which is what Satan likes to do. So I don't have any problem with that. And even, apparitions and ghosts, I think some of the accounts probably are legit, but are these really dead people who are wandering around? No. These would be just, spiritual beings meant to deceive or confuse or just mess with people's minds. I think that's probably the best solution to that. All right, questions on this one, Brad?
Just a pastoral care question. If you have a parishioner that's struggling with this kind of stuff, is there a resource that you pitch their way to?
I don't have a strong resource. Kolb might. He teaches more of this kind of stuff. He's got some stuff on, spiritual warfare and those kinds of things. The best things to do is just to help them to come to terms with, who's God and who's really in charge, and, get things back in check here a little bit. Because people start freaking out about this. They start seeing Satan as some kind of this, it's huge, antithesis to God. And he's not. He's God's Satan. And so he's under God's control. So that's probably the best thing to emphasize with people. All right, Adam.
For funerals, should we use terminology like they're asleep in Jesus, waiting for the last day?
I think so. I think it's appropriate. You can talk about being at rest. You can talk about being removed, they're no longer suffering in this church, in this vale of tears. There's appropriate scriptural language you can absolutely use, yeah. But don't talk about, now they're, at the big party, the banquet, they're celebrating with Jesus, Don't say more than you need to. Don't diminish it, and don't make people like, oh, he's dead, But by the same token, death isn't a cool thing. It is the wages of sin. It's not a cool thing. All right, this is one of the reasons why I get really frustrated when you read about people having their celebration of life. And this is not a funeral, this is a victory celebration. Well, heck, it sure feels like a funeral to me. I thought someone died. I'm kind of bummed out they're not around anymore. I don't feel like partying. Well, if something's wrong with your faith, then you should be celebrating because he's with Jesus now. Yeah, but it's a drag. He's not supposed to be dead. So who's right? I am. Stop with your stupid victory celebration. We'll have the victory celebration at the resurrection. Until then, let's cry a little bit. It stinks, doesn't it? Come on, let's be honest. And that's my biggest thing on that one. Yeah, Brian.
So when I was reading this, what came to mind was last class or a couple of years ago, you said Samuel was the Witch of Endor.
Yeah, I didn't say anything about that.
Okay, well, one of my other professors, and I've always understood it as, that's not actually Samuel, right?
Not Sam, yeah.
Yeah, and I read this, I was like, there you go. And because I know people are flippy-floppy about this. And one of my professors said, he was talking to, there's nothing scripturally that says it wasn't Samuel. And I'm like, yeah.
Well, what is it, Samuel or not, who knows? Best answer is consistently, no, it wouldn't be. But if God said, all right, Samuel, go ahead and go talk to Saul and freak him out, can God do that?
Yeah.
All right, so, all right. Look, all right.
How do we go with that question?
All right. It comes up, and I hate that. It's like, don't get hung up on trivialities, people. Saul's dead. Who cares? All right, sorry.
So, Lazarus.
Lazarus. Okay, he's dead too, but anyway, go ahead.
When he came back,
He was ripped off because here he was at rest, and now God says, got to go back. Lazarus, all right, fine. I'll wake up. I'll go back for another 30, whatever years, 10 years, then I'll die again. So when Lazarus comes back, he's not resurrected. He's just getting reanimated, coming back to life one more time, give you an extension, and then you get to die another time. See, Lazarus dies twice.
because with that too, there's also the passage in Matthew about all those saints coming
Right.
back. Same
Yeah.
thing as Lazarus.
Yeah, same thing as Lazarus.
Okay.
It's not like, it's just kind of, what you get is a foretaste of the reversal to come, but it's not
Okay.
full blast yet. All right, Kyle.
Is it appropriate to say that Jesus experienced the latter two types of death
Correct.
there? Okay.
Correct.
Not
That's
spiritual.
the whole point. Spiritual death is, well, he wouldn't have experienced spiritual death because he's always one with his Father, but he experiences the physical death and the eternal death because his death is a timeless death as the Son of God. That's right.
And the eternal death would be on the cross. but
Exactly.
Not in
Not
the
going to
grave.
hell. He doesn't
Yeah.
descend to hell to suffer. Correct. All right, good. Second point on 515, flying through these at breakneck speed. There is no scripture warrant for attributing to the souls of the departed a direct knowledge of particular things and happenings on earth. Quite right. So, do the people who have died know what's going on here? I hope not. It'd be really discouraging to them. So, there's no reason to think they know. Is it possible? Maybe. So, all those great cartoons and all those movies, no, there's nothing to support it. And you got the see-through grandma and grandpa watching their grandkids playing in family circus cartoons. No.
What about the transfiguration?
What about the transfiguration? Well, Pieper says here, this is obviously their resurrected bodies. Well, maybe. Or maybe, again, Abraham and Moses are just told, Moses and Elijah just said, go on down there and talk to Jesus for a little bit. Okay, we'll go. And so then they go for a while. And so Pieper wants it to be, they're already resurrected. Maybe so. We don't know for sure. All right. Third point. Scripture offers no hope for the conversion of departed souls. Right. And so it's appointed man wants to die and then the judgment in Hebrews, and that's pretty clear cut on that. All right. Good? Hey, next topic. Point 3 in here, the second advent of Christ. So is Christ coming? He is, yes. And the term we use for this is parousia, which would mean appearing. Okay, or arrival, actually. And this was a word actually used in the Greek world for when the king would arrive. It was the parousia, it was the coming, the appearance, the arrival of the king. So that's what arrival is. And I've heard some English speakers pronounce this as parousia, which I suppose it looks like, but come on, know your Greek people. And so, yes?
Parousia and Advent's the Latin?
Advent would be Latin, yes. Parousia would be a Greek root, and advente would be a Latin root. And so the coming, the arrival, yes. And so the parousia, the advent of Christ, the second advent of Christ is what we're talking about here. Parousia is more specifically always first. Advent has a tone, can be Bethlehem and the second coming, but with parousia, we're usually thinking about Christ's second coming. So when can Christ return according to the scriptural record? Are we waiting for anything yet to be fulfilled? No, we're all set. And so, can he return at any moment? Yes. Do we know when he's going to return? No. And in fact, the apocalypse is quite clear, and Jesus is quite clear, no one knows. Which is fascinating, because Jesus is pretty adamant about this. No one knows, not even the Son. So it's no one knows. And yet you have Christians killing themselves trying to figure it out and telling us when it's going to be. It's just, what are you doing? Stupid people. And of course, the reality is, as soon as somebody pegs a date, you know it's not going to be then. We do know. And so if you want to make sure Jesus never returns, just keep on predicting his return every day. No. Brian.
So Jesus has no name, not even the Son. So, what would we say Jesus' point of his life on earth? He didn't know?
We would say that's a Christological question for systematics too. Okay, I'm done with that. That was last quarter. No, what we're talking about here is this is simply the reality of the Son's, in his state of humiliation, having a limited knowledge. We can go that route. I think we can live with that. All right, good? So, great Luther quote, middle of 517, really nice. He writes, "Heaven and earth creak and crack like an old house ready to crash and collapse, and act in every way as though they divined that the world is soon to come to an end and that the day is close at hand. So do we see evidence of the impending end? We do. And the thing to remember is every generation of Christians has seen signs of the impending end. Luther was certain it couldn't last much longer. And you hear people today all the time, oh my goodness, the world, oh, the end is near. Yeah, Luther said that. People said it in Napoleon's day. People said it when Hitler was around. People said it during the Roman Empire. People said it during the Middle Ages. People have been saying this forever. And so there are plenty of signs. They're there. They're real. And it's not to diminish the reality of them, but don't ever be so saying, well, this is really it. Things have never been this bad before. That's not even true. Not even close. You know, historically, the world is a mess, and it just kind of goes through waves, and you get through, and things are really bad, and things, you know, kind of check themselves a little bit. Things get really bad, things check themselves a little bit. So we're heading into a trough. All right, so we'll just deal with that too. It doesn't mean this is surely the last time. Maybe, maybe not.
Isn't it, from a Christian faith perspective, healthier to think that way than to think the opposite?
Yes, it's healthy to be on your alert. Now we're in the Advent season. Be alert. Pay attention, be ready for the end. So it's much better to inculcate a sense of, wow, we need to be ready for Christ any minute now. Good. Rather than, it's not going to happen anytime soon. That's what Jesus specifically warns against doing. So you're quite right. All right, good. All right, that's good. And we're not to be curious about this. Got that good. Okay, wonderful, good. All right. And then we get into, on page 520, all of Pieper's long digression, or not digression, he needs to handle this, but he starts talking about all of his millennialist and chiliast stuff. And I'm going to postpone all that for next time, okay? Because the CTCR document that you're going to be reading handles this quite thoroughly and a little more cleanly than Pieper. You know, it's just a little more updated and it brings in a few more things. So I'm not going to get into detail here. Bottom line is simply this. What Pieper tells you is right. There's nothing wrong here, nothing I'm going to contend with, but there's just the CTCR handles it a little more thoroughly, and so I want you to read that and then we'll handle it there. The big question, of course, is what is meant by this text in the book of the Apocalypse where you have mention of this 1,000-year reign of Christ. What's going on with that? What does this mean? And if you're a literalist, you're going to say, well, there's going to be a 1,000-year reign of Christ here on this earth, and that's what we're looking forward to, and that's a millennialist position. There are varieties of millennialists, and the bottom line for us is we are a millennialist or amillennialist, which means you stick the alpha privative in front and you just negated the whole thing. Now, does that mean we don't believe in a millennium? Yes and no. We believe that the scriptures are correct, and when the Apocalypse talks about this 1,000-year reign of Christ, it's true, but what is meant by that is kind of the critical thing. And what we would say is we're not looking for a time when Christ is going to come, set up a throne in Jerusalem, and rule the world for 1,000 years before Satan breaks out and causes this one big last hoopla. What we would say is that the 1,000-year reign is Christ's reign in the church even now. That's what's going on here. And that's one way of reading it. Another way of reading it is to talk about how the 1,000 years, the millennial period, is really kind of talking about the complete full fulfillment of everything at the end. That's also a possibility. Because what do you get from where does 1,000 come from anyway? Well, in the book of Revelation, numbers are everything, and numbers are significant for what they stand for. 10 is the number for completion. Nothing's left out. And 3 is God's number. So when something's taken to the third level, it's like really complete from God's perspective. So 10 times 10 times 10 is 1,000. How about that? And so 1,000 means complete fullness, nothing left out. And so you get the same thing with the 144,000 who are sealed. You know, that's the 144,000 Jehovah's Witnesses who get to go to heaven. So yeah, all this stuff plays in. And so where's that coming from? Well, you've got your 1,000. We know where that came from. But where's 144? Well, 12, which is the number for the church, number of Israel, number of apostles. It's the church's number. And 12 times 12, complete full number of the church, nothing left out. So you got 144, and then 1,000 on top of that, complete, really full complete. So 144,000 means the whole kit and caboodle number of the church, not one person who's not elect. Everybody's there. Comprehensive complete. That's what 144 means. Not 144,000, boom, there, done, cut off. All the rest of you on earth, sorry. No, that's not that.
Because I guess just to support that too, you've got Revelation, what is it, 7:9, where it says just there's a multitude that no one can count.
Right.
I can count on a fork with that.
That's right.
Okay.
All right, good. And we'll talk more about this next time, but I just give you a couple things really quickly here now. So that means we get to skip a whole bunch of pages here as we move forward in dealing with the land of Israel and all this kind of stuff, and we can skip all the way to page 534. Okay? So make sure you're reading the CTCR document next time and pay attention to that one. So for next time, read CTCR carefully, crank through long quickly, and crank through Creefs a little more quickly, but take your time on the CTCR, make sure you get what's going on with that one. Okay. All right, so we go to page 534, the resurrection of the dead. Now we're going to finally talk about the real deal, what we're all looking forward to. The strangest thing is that in the church, the Christian church, in my experience in the Lutheran church, is how few people actually believe in the resurrection of the dead, even though it's confessed in the creed week after week after week. It's stunning. And the evidence I have for this is when you actually start to teach about the resurrection of the body, and you tell people, you know, you realize the body you're sitting in here today, you're going to have for eternity. And you see people's faces kind of going, you know, they're shocked. They can't imagine such a thing. You know, I always thought I was going to get rid of this and be Socrates and float up to heaven, you know, and who needs my body? You know, I'm freed from this. I'm the wind now. Yay, I'm freed from my body. And you tell them, no, your body's going to be resurrected. They look at you like you're talking weird talk. And they start thinking, you know, zombies or something, you know. They get all messed up about this. And so this is just not well known. But the resurrection of the dead teaches that the body you're in today is your body, and it's going to live forever in a resurrected state. Glorified, fulfilled, all that's supposed to be, but it's your body. And it's the whole point. That's what we're talking about here, is the resurrection of the dead. And then Pieper's making his case for this. And he says clearly, this is page 536, this is a fundamental teaching of the faith. If you deny the resurrection of the dead, you're not Christian. Because if you're denying the resurrection of the dead, you are by definition also denying Christ's resurrection, and if Christ is not raised, you're not a Christian. This is Paul's argument in 1 Corinthians 15. If Christ is not raised, our faith is futile. We have no faith. Everything in our Christian faith hinges on the reality of Christ's resurrection. So the resurrection, that is an absolutely essential doctrine. It's not an optional kind of a thing. Well, yeah, we can kind of have some disagreement on that. No, if you don't believe in the resurrection, you're not Christian. All right, so the second point on here is who's going to be raised? Every single human being is raised. So even those who are in torment now, separated from Christ in death, at the resurrection will have a body, and now body and soul, they go into hell, into agony. And this is the reality. Not a pleasant thought, but that's exactly what we teach with the resurrection. There's a general resurrection, all are raised, and that's what's going on. Now, we get to Brian's question on the bottom of 538. And we're quoting here. In regard to asexuality, Beyer correctly says, they received the sex and all the parts or members that they had in this life, of course, not for the restoration of the former use, but for the integrity of the organic body. And then going on, since seed time and harvest, food and raiment, etc., cease with this world, the spiritual body, as Luther expresses it, will, quote, no more be an eating, sleeping, digesting body, but will be spiritually fed and sustained by God and be indestructible life. This, in my opinion, is going beyond what they know. Is a bit of a stretch. And I think Luther's being fed here a little bit by some of his medieval thinking, a little bit of his Augustinian thing, because Augustine honestly moves into a kind of a Platonic, Neoplatonic sort of a diminishing of the body from time to time, especially when it comes to thinking about sex and those kinds of things. And Luther is not completely freed from some of this. And the evidence I have of that is his Genesis commentary, where he describes sex as kind of going like an epileptic fit. And you do it if you have to, but don't enjoy it too much, you know. And it's kind of almost a sense of it. And so Luther isn't quite really shaken all the way free from some of his diminishing of the body stuff. Now, what this is getting at is this. If we're resurrected with real bodies, that means we have real bodies. So is our sex going to continue on into eternity? Well, yeah. Maleness is part of my identity, and femaleness is part of Amy's identity, our token female here today. So it's part of who we are. So our sex is not something kind of, you know, ancillary, sort of, you know, kind of just a supplemental thing. It's core to who you are. And the more you learn about this stuff from psychological, sociological things, you know, your sexuality is core to your identity. It's just how you see the world. You are sexually male, sexually female all the way through. Now, that's true. So they're suggesting here, well, we have to have our bodies the way we are because that's necessary, but we don't need any of that stuff anymore. And Luther even says you don't need to eat anymore because you'll be spiritually fed. And I'm thinking, I don't know. I'm not quite so convinced of this, frankly. Jesus eats fish when he's with the disciples, but he didn't need to. He was just doing it to prove that he could. But isn't there a certain amount of joy that comes in eating? Isn't there a certain amount of delight in the kind of fellowship of meals? And isn't the very image of Scripture about this heavenly banquet? So is this just metaphor? Or is there more to it than that? And I'm not ready to just write it off and say, well, obviously you don't need to eat. Well, maybe I want to. Or maybe God wants me to. And who's to say what the resurrected body is going to be like? I think this is one of those times where we have to be much more careful and say, let's not overstate things. And I think when people start saying, well, it won't be that, based on what? Based on your presuppositions about the body? Based on your presuppositions about what spiritual should mean? Let's be careful. Spiritual means in sync with God's purposes. And if God wants our resurrected bodies to be a whole lot like they were in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve ate. And who's to say we're not going to? And sexuality, who knows what this is going to mean? What God is consistent about is things aren't wasted and things aren't, kind of made moot. They're made more whole and more complete and better. So what it will mean for eternity, I don't know. And I don't want to speculate on that. And I just don't want to speculate because we just don't know. But what I know is that nothing's ever lost or wasted in God's economy of creation. So let's just wait and see what God has in mind. I don't think any of us will be disappointed. Okay? Coleman, is that where you're going with some of that? Okay.
Look, I guess in terms of sexuality then and God's economy of creation, I know we have saying, marriage not given in marriage, that type of stuff. But right. Will there be kids?
Well, see, this is this kind of stuff I'm not sure. What Jesus says when he's kind of being. Go ahead, Adam, jump in with yours.
I have a different question.
Okay, let me finish this one. So we got the Sadducees trying to trick Jesus. 7 brothers, whose wife will she be? And Jesus says, "You're mistaken. It's not going to be this way. They're going to be like the angels, whatever that means." And then he says they're not going to be given in marriage or getting married, which means there's not going to be an ongoing marriage. But he doesn't say that you won't be husband and wife. He doesn't say that. And so there's a lot of stuff he doesn't say. So we should be careful not to read into that too much. What it means, I'm not sure. And so when in the resurrection, will things be worse than they are now? No, they're going to be better. And so this is also something I think we need to tell people. I've had so many people, like widows, who come and say, I'm not looking for the resurrection because I won't be with my husband. Or, I had a pastor tell me he won't be my husband in eternity based on that text. He won't be my husband. And so I'm totally bummed out because we had such a great marriage. I can't imagine not having him as my husband. He'll just be a dude. It's going to be horrible. And I look at her and say, what are you talking about? Did you have a great marriage? Yeah. It'll be better in heaven. And everything you establish in this earth is not lost. There's nothing lost. It's going to be fulfilled more. He will be your husband plus. So just look forward to it. And they look at me like, you're kidding me. No, I'm not kidding you. This is what God has told us. Nothing's lost. He will be what you had here will be even better. So don't dread it. It's going to be awesome. But this cool thing is we have these kinds of relationships on such greater levels with all of our fellow Christians. And who knows what this all means? I don't know. But it's going to be awesome, whatever it is. Kreeft, you're reading for next time, delves into this stuff even a little bit more. And he has some thoughts I had never thought before, which is why I'm having you read him. So we'll see what you think about him next time around. Chris. I'm sorry, Adam first. Adam was waiting.
The anomalies of Enoch and Elijah.
Yeah.
And they got taken up.
Yeah, those are definitely anomalies. So Enoch walks with the Lord and is no more. And Elijah's taken up. So what's with that? So that's what, what's going on there. And so are their bodies already joined with their souls, or are their bodies just parked waiting for the resurrection? I don't know. Okay, sorry, no help. Chris next, then Jess.
I kind of was going off what you were saying, about relationships kind of understood as they're meant to be.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't cite anything directly scriptural on this, but I thought marriage is understood as someone who's there to, between two people to understand what that love is, and even though you can't be perfect,
yeah.
But the attempt to.
And so then the perfection of love comes, we don't need this shadow anymore. So marriage being a type, so now the fulfillment's come, we don't need the type.
Right, and so then in heaven, therefore, there is no need, of course,
for
marriage, because their relationships between everyone will be understood perfectly.
Perhaps.
So that's why I wonder about the husband and wife.
Perhaps. But see, will it be a step backward? Will the husband and wife think, boy, I wish I had what we had before? Or will we say, this is better? See, that's my point. And so it's not a diminishing. And so what will it actually mean? I'm not exactly sure, and I'd much rather err on the side of claiming ignorance and waiting to see rather than making definitive statements, which can be, I think, misleading. Okay, Jess.
If you are leaning toward the side of, yeah, you will have your husband in heaven and it'll be even better, that goes right back to the question the Pharisees asked Jesus, well, whose wife will she be?
Whose wife will she be? All of them. These are things I don't know, and I'm not too worried about that. I'm content to say that God will orchestrate everything at the resurrection in such a way that the unity that we have in the body of Christ will surpass anything we've had here now, and it won't be a step backwards. I guess that's what I would say. And I think Chris's point is well taken too. So even our definition of husband and wife is going to be changed at the resurrection in ways we didn't anticipate. And this is the thing we have to stress here, guys, in things we can't anticipate. And Luther makes a nice comparison. He says, you think about the child living in utero, the baby before he's born. How's his life? It's pretty good, It's warm, it's comfortable, interesting. I get moved around. I hear new things all the time, and it's not a bad life. It's pretty good. I like it in here. It's just safe. It's secure. Pretty good. And so when you try to talk to a child in utero, here's what it's like outside the womb. I don't get that. I don't know what you're talking about. I have no concept. What do you mean? Error. I don't get that. What's that? You can't even conceive of it. And how would you try to explain to this child what it's like? Let me tell you about error. What's that? How do you explain any of that? But when the child's born, it's like, whoa, what? You want to go back? No, thanks. A lot better out here. A lot better out here. And so you can't even imagine, but at the time it seems pretty good. So we think about everything in terms of this world and what we know. And so when we step into the eschatological fulfillment, it's going to be like, whoa, never saw that coming. Never saw that coming. But now that I see it, of course, absolute continuity. Of course, this is what it had to be that way, of course. But never would have guessed it. And I think that's the kind of experiences we're going to have when we see the continuity of what God's doing and how He fulfills everything. All right? Yeah.
I know, because marriage is where the two become one flesh, and I guess if both of them are saved, then they're not married. They're married. It's a marriage to Christ. The two are one.
Correct.
We're one with their. In Christ's flesh. But if the one is damned, one who's not saved, who doesn't believe, you're not married to them anymore in that afterlife.
Probably true. Probably true. We'll just wait and see. I'm saying that a lot because I don't know. Don't know. I won't claim to know it. Now, Pieper on 539, again, I think he's saying what he shouldn't say. Second line, the opinion, very top line, the opinion that everyone will rise in the stature he had at his death is the most probable. Well, that stinks. So what if I die at 3 days old? I'm a baby forever? Yeah. Oh, everybody gets to play with the baby. Oh, great. I'm the baby. Don't I ever get to sit at the adult table? Come on. So I'm frank. I'm just not buying it. I'm just not buying it. I would say that we at our death become everything we were supposed to be, fully human, and yet everything we've experienced in this life or that we didn't experience in our life is part of our story. So will we know that this child, this person, this being who's now at the eschaton died at infancy? Yeah, it's probably part of who they are, and we'll get that. But they're not going to be diminished for that. And if somebody lived to be 100 years old and all the wrinkles and all the experiences, are those going to be part of their identity? I think they are. What that means, I don't know. But we are everything we've experienced, but we're fully everything where we're supposed to be. We have achieved the full humanity. So that means we're all 29 and buff. No, I don't know. Yeah, rats, finally, yeah. Without having to lift a weight, awesome, But it's going to be cool, whatever it is. And this is the God's promise. All right, good. Now, moving quickly. 540. This is the next section, the final judgment. And here I take issue with Pieper on a couple more things. So he's talking about the final judgment, and he says, who's going to appear before the judgment seat of Christ? Well, who is? Everyone. Now, Pieper's got some issues with this. And he starts kind of fudging on this a little bit because he says, well, the believers won't be judged. And so it says, all will appear before the judgment seat of Christ, but the believers won't be judged. And then he quotes, this is page 540, footnote 67. He quotes John 3:18 and John 5:24. He that believeth on him, the Son of God, is not condemned. And then he puts judges in square brackets. And then John 5, he shall not come into condemnation. Okay, the krisin, the judgment, the condemnation. Now, the problem I've got with this is Pieper is equating judgment with condemnation. They're not the same. Yeah, throw the weasel at them. Because to be judged is not the same to be as condemned. Because when you're judged, you're being judged. All right. So when let's say you've got a heifer at the 4-H fair, is your heifer going to be judged? And if you get the blue ribbon, cool. Best in show, even better. Was your heifer still judged? Well, yeah. Judgment was all cool, but it was judgment. All right? So it doesn't mean condemnation. Condemnation and judgment are not synonyms. And Pieper's acting like they are here. Now, maybe in German they're closer. I don't know. But they're not synonyms. And so I think that's part of his problem on this a little bit. Now, the other thing I have is this. You have clear-cut text like 2 Corinthians where it says, we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ and give an account of what we've done in the flesh. And Paul's writing this to Christians, telling them to shape up. So, is that legit or not? It sounds pretty legit to me. Now, Pieper's got problems with this because he says, but wait, there's no condemnation. We shouldn't be afraid. It's all going to be cool. Well, that's fine. I think it is going to all be cool, but let's be careful how this plays out. And remember what Caberly said. Caberly's point was pretty clear. Are we going to have to give an account of what we did in the flesh? Yes. Should that make us decide we should probably straighten up a little bit? I hope so. You know? And so we need to be a little careful here. And then Pieper does this game on page 541. And so this is the second paragraph down. He writes, but why then are the statements that our law, example, we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, addressed to the believers? He says, a proper reply is, here's his answer, as in general, the preaching of the law is necessary and salutary for the believers because of the flesh still clinging to them, so in particular the words of the law pertaining to the judgment on the last day. Well, what's that mean? It means they're lying. This bothers me. Pieper is actually suggesting, well, it doesn't really mean that. So when Paul tells the Corinthians, we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, he's just saying that to scare them. But it's not going to really happen. I don't get it. Pieper's almost, it seems to me like Pieper is suggesting that Paul's kind of fibbing to the Corinthians because they need that, because of their flesh. And so keep him in line. He's going to tell them a little white lie, but it's not really going to happen. So don't worry about it. That bothers me. I think the better answer is, no, you're going to appear before the judgment seat of Christ. You're going to have to give an account. Maybe you should straighten up. Maybe you should take seriously what you're doing or not doing because it might be a little embarrassing. So maybe it'll work like this. Now, pure speculation time, but here's my scenario. How it works for the Christian. We appear, judgment day has come. Christ has returned. Now the judgment is happening. And remember, we have eternity for this judgment, so it can take all the time it needs. So, Joel Biermann. So I step into the dock. And on the Jumbotron appears my life story. It's there, all of it, everything. The things I did in private, the things when I was a kid, the cookies I stole, teasing my brother mercilessly. It's all there. It's all there. How comfortable will this moment be? Not a pleasant time. A little awkward to say the least. Like, oh, did that have to be up there? Yep, the whole thing is there. So, in this life, when I'm living, does it motivate me sometimes to think about what that Jumbotron moment might be like? And maybe I don't want one more bad event up there. I think I'll refrain from that activity simply because I'd rather not that be up there. I think that's fine. That's totally legit. That's Caberly's first function of the law. Get that old man in shape. I can live with that. That's fine. So anyway, there it goes. It's all going down. And then finally it stops and I'm crushed because my sin is killing me. And at that moment, when I feel like the judgment that I deserve is going to come, Jesus comes in and says, oh, wait, this one's with me. Father says, cool, grace. It's all good. It's all good. So it might have its moments of, but it all ends good. And so no condemnation. There's no damned to hell result. There is grace, there is forgiveness, and it's awesome how it ends. But there is that tough time. And I don't think that's bad. I don't think that's a wrong thing to say at all. And does that put a little fear into a Christian? Same as what St. Paul wanted to say. Then you have that weird passage in Jude where it's talked about snatching people as through the flames. And you get the sense of people who kind of just making it in, you know? Like, dude, you're here, but me, I smell a little smoky. How'd it go down there, you know? Yeah. Just made it, dude. You know, what's with this? But see, that's scriptural. And there's a little more to this. Take seriously what's going on here. Take seriously the battle. And I don't think it's, I really just don't think it's right to say, don't sweat it, it's all going to be good, and in the name of the gospel. Because you're mitigating the very scriptural record. And I don't get it, Pieper is suggesting that, well, no, it's just a little law to help keep people in line. Come on. You know, we're accountable, and yet there's no condemnation. And that's the good news for us. All right. And now Luther, he quotes Luther, the judgment is abolished, good. It concerns the believer as little as if it does the angels. I'm fine with that too. All believers pass from this life into heaven without any judgment and will be the judge of others. Well, that's true also. We're going to be judging with Christ. That's part of it. And the judgment here, I would say, is without condemnation, but there is still the accountability. And I don't want to lose that because to me that's a very scriptural thing. All right, so I wanted to make sure that gets covered. All right, good. Saw a question here, hand go up or down. Okay, good. So, point 6, the end of the world, it finally comes. So the end of the world is the end, and it will happen. Pieper says, is this going to be an annihilation or a recreation? And he wants to leave it as an open question. What have you all been taught? It's the recreation, because that's the right answer. I don't see why we would say it's an open question. If you want to say it's an open question, it's primarily on the text out of 2 Peter, where everything's going to be burned up. But 2 Peter is probably not canonical anyway, so don't worry about it. Paul wins on this one. And Paul in Romans is so clear about, you know, the earth creation waiting for the restoration, waiting for the sons of God to be revealed, and for the full restoration to come. And the cool thing about the restoration teaching is the continuity it brings from creation all the way through. And it starts to bring all the scriptural record together, brings the whole narrative together. It's the supremely good answer. Now, will the recreation be a disjunction, that it's going to be so dramatic that it's going to feel like a total starting over? In a sense, yes. And see, that's where I go back to my analogy of the child in utero being born. Wow! But there's a complete continuity. The uterus is part of the world, and it was all part of it, and it's all still the same child, the same world. It's just like, whoa! Who could have imagined? And so at the resurrection, it's going to be so awesome. It's going to be like, who could have seen any of this? And yet, there's a continuity there. And I think that's the whole point. All right. Then we go to the next part, eternal damnation, 544. So, will there be a hell? Yes. And Pieper makes a wise point here. He says, even unbelievers want there to be a hell. And I've experienced this to be true. It's true. And, you know, even profane people who have no interest in spiritual things at all, who won't even confess God, want there to be a hell because they want people who are really bad to suffer more than they did in this life. Because you need a hell for Hitler. You need a hell for Saddam Hussein. You need a hell for Stalin. Something's got to be there so these people don't get off so easy. You know, for Hitler just to commit suicide, that's just too easy. There needs to be a hell. And you get this. So people will say, I don't believe in hell. But when you press them a little bit, so you mean people who are horrendous people, just they die and that's the end of it? Well, no, that's not very fair, is it? So they yearn for this, for the sense of accounting. And what I think is going on here is simply the natural law kicking in and our zeal for justice. We want there to be justice. And so hell is necessary for the score to get settled, frankly. And that's part of what's going on here. So I think that's quite right. So people do recognize this, the need for hell. 546, we have the kind of, what will hell be like? Who knows? The illustration, you know, worm does not die, fire cannot be quenched. This is Jesus' language to give us a sense of this. C.S. Lewis likened it to loneliness and the isolation, and you know, I think there's a lot of merit to that. Loneliness is one of the worst things we endure as human beings, because we're created for community, and to be forced to be alone is horrendous. And so just the utter aloneness, because in C.S. Lewis, the people who are really damned are just further and further away. They just keep on pushing away from everybody. They don't want anybody around. They're just alone and in their misery by themselves. I think that's good. Good quote from Gerhard. I get down on Gerhard sometimes, so I'll give a good quote from him here. The Pieper gives us about the last 8 lines on the page. It is wiser to be concerned about escaping this eternal fire by true repentance than to engage in an unprofitable argument as to the nature of this fire. That's very, very wise. Don't worry so much about what it is, just don't go there. And I think that's quite right. Will there be degrees of torment? The Bible hints at this. Yes, we have the sense of this being plainly taught in the Bible, that there's going to be more judgment for some, greater condemnation for others. So Dante's levels of hell isn't far off scripturally. Who's where? Well, that's Dante guessing. But the sense of greater punishment is there, just like we have the sense of greater reward. Jess?
It seems to bring a coram mundo relationship into eternal coram Deo statement.
It does, absolutely. And see, this is, and I would be totally on board with that, because see, what we do coram mundo does matter. It's part of our identity. It's part of who we are, and that lasts. That's kind of the whole point. That's the continuity thing. So yeah. All right, good. Let's see. So we got that. Then we have eternal life, 550. Cranking towards the end here. So we have a life without end, and we make a distinction here between bliss and reward. So everybody experiences the bliss of being in God's presence and being part of the recreated reality. Will there be degrees of glory? Yeah. So there are going to be people who are going to have greater glory and greater gifts, and it's going to be fine. And the strange thing is, no one's going to be bothered by this, because envy will also be expunged from us. And so the sense of, wait a minute, he's not as good as I was. I suffered more than he did. That won't even occur to us. We'll see people being glorified, and we'll just be delighted in that. And it'll all be part of God's justice and part of God's mercy, and it's going to be good. But we'll all be experiencing the reality of God. You can't have more bliss. You're all in God's presence, and that's the beautiful thing. Pieper rightly says, footnote 80, this is page 551, conversation between Abraham and the rich man in hell, like all accessory details in parables, may not be stressed. And what Pieper's saying there, which is a good rule of thumb, is you don't use parables to prove doctrinal points, because parables are parables. And the truth of the parable, absolutely. But the details, like, okay, so there's a big chasm, and the damned can talk to the saved. Well, in Jesus' parable, for the sake of the parable, yeah, that happens. But does that mean that's the way it is? No, don't read more into the parable than you should. All right, good. So there are no degrees of bliss, but there will be degrees of glory and God's grace and mercy there. Location of heaven, who knows? We often think about it being up, but it's simply God's presence where that is. And we often think of hell as being down, but again, these are just spatial things we associate with spiritual up and bad things going down, but there's nothing to this any more than just the kind of metaphors we operate with. Chris?
We do is 2 Corinthians 12 with the guy who's caught up into a level of heaven.
Oh, yeah. Well, he's just basically, Paul probably, is having the experience of being pulled up into God's reality, up into God's reality, whatever that is. Yeah, the number, the level, so who knows? He's in God's level, I don't know. We're going to all experience God's grace and God's presence. All right? Coleman?
I don't know if you're going to get to it or not. The passage of fear God who destroys both body and soul in hell.
Right. So who sends a person to hell? God does.
Right.
Well, fear him who. And then the him is, it says fear him who. And the pronoun is assumed, well, the antecedent is God.
But what I'm asking is, what does God destroy body and soul in hell?
Oh, so annihilation? No, it's an ongoing destruction. And so the idea of an annihilation, which is a popular teaching among Jehovah's Witnesses, is not scriptural. Because Jesus is very clear, worm doesn't die, fire doesn't go out, the endless torment. And so annihilation is a nice way out. You just get toasted, you're done. But no, so the destruction is the idea of the destruction as in condemnation. Okay, good? Yes, Josh.
With the recreation thing,
yeah.
how do you bring the killing and making lives and the recreation? Are they they're not totally opposite?
No, this is the whole idea. We kill, we are made alive. It's you who are dead, but you're resurrected. Same you, but new.
That's what all of creation will be like on the last day, right?
All of creation will be restored to where it's supposed to be. Yeah,
so
rocks and this.
So it's like a killing.
In a sense, yeah. So we have the wiping out, the annihilation, you know, as in smoke kind of thing, but then it's going to be recreated, and it's going to be a continuity. It's there, but greater. Yeah. All right, good. Page 554, almost done here. So the necessity of this life is the basis for the admonition addressed to the servants of the word, Christians to admonish and reprove one another, and to stay blameless in this life. So in other words, eschatology should impact how we live today. If we know we're living for eternity, and I would argue if we know we're living for an accountability, we should be concerned with how we live. It matters. And as Jess pointed out, you know, just there's a continuity here. So what you do in this life does translate into the resurrected world. It's not all just like, there, clean slate, everybody starts over. No, you are who you are. Your agency continues. And so the things you're doing is part of your life story. In God's mercy, none of it's going to be condemning, but in God's mercy, it's going to be glorified. But it means this stuff counts, and it's not trivial. It's not insignificant.